Something I think about a lot is how philosophers and mystics of antiquity, like Plotinus, would refer to the one also as the good, being that it reconciles all dualities, the destructive and the restorative, the ugly and the beautiful, the just and the unjust, to the point that it's ineffable and beyond positive description and truly neti-neti. You'd really expect the one to be something more like the neutral. Separations between malefic and benefic can't survive within the one. Malefics literally translates to evildoers, and benefics to good doers. And being reconciled and dissolved into a unified whole, you'd really expect neutral as a descriptor more than the good. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the one, while ostensibly ineffable, is something like a quasi-benefic, and in little funny ways shares qualities with the benefic planets, but in ways that are more absolute than sort of transient and worldly as the planetary benefics are. So, for example, Jupiter is associated with justice, freedom, and that which brings people together. Jupiter is unitive. It unites people under common principles. It's a very big part of what allows communities to work harmoniously together towards common interests and principles. And crucially, Jupiter, according to traditional sources, seeks equity and equality amongst people in these communities it fosters. The one, by its very nature, is perfectly just, as there is no distinction of parts or hierarchy to be abused. It's merely a unified oneness with no friction where no other thing can act unjustly against any other thing, because there is no other thing. And thus, the unconditioned mind, in its infinite vastness, is infinitely equal and equitable, as there is no distinctions or partitions amongst this mind, and therefore no hierarchy to be abused amongst it. Additionally, there's the concept of freedom, because as Saturn imprisons and binds, Jupiter liberates one from bondage. The greatest bondage of all is fate, the stories that are written for us, the determinism of our lives that render it nearly entirely predictable from start to finish, thanks to tools like astrology. Astrology itself being composed of fragmentations of the one passing through time and space to create cycles. Actually, to be closest to the one is to be closest to the most potent possible experience of free will, because the one is beyond stories and cycles. It's merely unconditioned mind carrying infinite potential, and that infinite potential carries with it the possibility of the most profound choices. The choices that come from pure consciousness rather than the pre-written conditioning of stories, fate, astrology, and the like. The one is beyond determinism. It exists in a state of utmost free will, and therefore it's beyond all bondage. Put in other terms, the unconditioned mind is free. The observer is free, like Jupiter. Or we can look to another benefic, Venus. Venus creates amity among people and dissolves conflicts and fights. Venus brings wars to an end and replaces them with peace amongst people and nations. Instead of existing in a tug of war, Venus brings about cooperation. It brings people together. Again, like Jupiter, Venus, a benefic, is unitive. It unites things rather than separating them like Mars and Saturn do. Well, all throughout creation, we can see this tug of war. In fact, it's how astrology works. Every sign has an opposite sign, and that sign is ruled by an opposite planet. For example, Libra is ruled by Venus and Aries by Mars. And so, any planet on its journey will be caught between this tug of war between Venus and Mars as it journeys through the signs. And in a manner of speaking, the entire zodiac is just a series of tugs of war, dualistic forces pulling for greater influence. That is one of the interesting things about creation to me. To some extent, the planets work in cooperation, but to a greater extent, the world exists as the result of the competition of the interests of these planets. It reminds me a bit of the Qliphoth, the inverted Kabbalistic tree of life, aka the tree of death, particularly the Qlipha of Thamiel, which is described as a split or fractured state of consciousness. Where divine consciousness seeks harmony, Thamiel symbolizes the struggle of two contending opposing forces fighting for dominance rather than aligning with a singular divine will. While Keter signifies divine unity and oneness, Thamiel embodies duality, division, and conflict. It's often depicted as a two-headed beast where the heads are gnashing at each other in a state of perpetual conflict and discontent, one always vying for dominance over the other. It's very martial, creating division and conflict, whereas Venus soothes these divisions and creates harmony and unity. Similarly, the One has no such frictions or adversaries. The One doesn't exist in a tug of war with itself. The One exists in a state of perfect peace, with no separations, where all consciousness is in such concord that there doesn't even exist tribes or variants of consciousness. Just such complete and all-consuming unity and peace that all consciousness merely converges back together with nothing to separate it. The consciousness of the One resides in peace with no friction or opponents. Okay, and third and final of what Ficino called his three graces is the sun. The sun throughout all of traditional astrology is associated with the eye and the spirit. It's seen as the instrument of perception, that which allows things to be seen. And this isn't a hard correlation to draw, given that the light of the sun is the only thing that allows us to see our world at all. In fact, ancient Vedic astrologers associated with the sun with the Atman, the pure consciousness and divine observer, distinct from all story, ego, conditioning, and self-identification. The One is the primordial mind behind all creation. It's pure subjectivity devoid of any object to observe. In a manner of speaking, to look upon the non-dual light of the One is to look upon the only real thing, because everything that exists in creation is a kind of Platonic cave shadow theater. It's all distortions, shadows of the truth found in the real divinity. And everything leading back to the One is just a series of fractured truths and distortions, like you say, half-truth. But the truth in creation is less than half. It's subject to innumerable fractures, because creation is predicated upon fragmentation of the One, allowing for the contrast of different things. The One, as pure subjectivity, is the instrument of perception, like the eye and the sun. And with no object to perceive, this pure subjectivity perceives the only completely true and completely meaningful thing in existence, non-dual light. Except, fascinatingly, it wouldn't be correct to call it a thing or an existence, because non-dual light is pre-existent and atemporal, and it is what the Kabbalists call Ein Sof, no thingness. So, in a funny way, the One, while ineffable and not describable in positive terms, contains within it the ability for consciousness to experience a variant on some of the greatest virtues of the benefics without any of the discordant and harmful qualities of the malefics, truly making the One the good. While this has hitherto been a love letter to the beauty of the One, a crucial distinction between the quasi-benefica of the One and the properties of the benefic planets must be addressed here. And in making this distinction, it can't help but work towards furthering revealing the ugliness of creation and the Demiurge's work. While the quasi-benefic characteristics of the One are absolute and forever unchanging, as an infinitely complete thing can never be changed or transformed, the benefic planets, the good left over from the One found in creation, they struggle. From an astrological standpoint, justice is usually lukewarm, because Jupiter is usually peregrine. That is to say, not in a position of major or minor dignity. More troublesome, a quarter of the time, that is to say, while in 3 signs of the 12, Jupiter is in a sign of debility, like Capricorn, Virgo, or Gemini. Even worse, it spends most of its time in those signs of debility in positions that are also peregrine with no minor dignity. In fact, justice as Jupiter is only powerfully pronounced a quarter of the time, when in signs of dignity like Cancer, Pisces, or Sagittarius. We can say exactly the same of Venus and its things, and the Sun and its things. Its virtues are usually in a state of diminishment. All malefic planets are subject to the same limitations as well, and as a result, most of creation generally exists in a state of mediocrity. The one offers absolute meaning and fulfillment. While not exactly the kind of orgasm and pleasure you may be accustomed to, but by contrast, the things found within creation, the demiurge's things, never fulfill or satisfy in a consistent way, and are usually mired in mediocrity, not tending towards the good, nor the evil, nor the very beautiful, nor the very ugly. Just an adulterated, distorted, unfulfilling, tepid, lukewarm, and unexceptional shadow of the divinity that gave it life. Actually, you don't have to look far. Just go to the store. Go outside. Look at the people all around. Not necessarily ugly looking. Certainly not beautiful, usually. Just meh. The astrological concept of peregrination and the fact that planets are usually peregrine points to the meh found through all creation. Endless seeking, meaning and fulfillment forever around the corner, and endless faces, expressions, and depictions of mediocrity and meh standing between you and that ever-elusive contentment. Speaking of Marsilio Ficino and his three graces, did you know Ficino once said that the Sun and Jupiter are the planets closest to God? He might have accidentally been right when saying that. I say accidentally because I just got done analogizing Ficino's three graces with the Hermetic One, the Godhead, but this is almost certainly not the God of which Ficino spoke. Being a Christian priest, he was speaking of the Christian God. And in comparing this creator God to the benefics, he meant to suggest that the God that gave us the world and all of creation was inherently a lover of virtue, order, and harmony above all else. This is a view not just shared by Christians, but also New Agers under the belief that there is a force that controls the universe that is inherently positive in nature. This is a lie. It's understandable that people would be upset upon discovering that this is a lie. Many people look upward to the sky hoping for a benevolent higher power to be there to help make sense of the trials and tribulations of their lives. And I know for a fact that I've lost a number of subscribers by pointing out that this is a lie. But to be honest, while I do make Chosen Ones content specifically to be viewed by other Chosen Ones, I don't fall into the same pattern of all the other Chosen One channels that peddle motivational hope porn. Pointing out how demonic everyone is and then spraying hopium and cope is honestly super boring and doesn't actually solve any problems. I don't give a shit who my content upsets. My only obligation is to tell the truth to other Chosen Ones and offer the best solutions surrounding that. And one of those truths is that the Creator God isn't the hopium, Yahweh, egregore, nor Jesus, but the Demiurge. And as the force behind all of creation, I think it's really important to get to know what your Creator God's character is. What is the Demiurge? What are its motivations? Well, its character is actually markedly turbulent. My premise is that the Demiurge is actually just the one, or the Godhead or monad, but having passed from pre-existence into existence, its divinity was lost or corrupted. In other words, I believe divinity can't survive creation. The true divinity resides in a place of rest, perpetually uncreated, and existing always in a state of latent potential. What it means for there to be creation is the potential of the one to cross over into time and space. Having passed in time and space, the various facets of reality can't all exist in the same time, in the same space. So the one is separated into parts, and this is the birth of duality and fragmentation. Now separated, these fragments now know the taste of loss. Before, they existed in a state of infinite completeness. But now, being fragments, they know what it is to be incomplete. And so they journey to find what they're missing. That journey takes them through a number of different aspects of reality, of which they're also somewhat foreign. But most of all, what these fragments are seeking are their perfect opposites. This is what I call the eros of oppositions. Evil is attracted to good. Domineering personalities are attracted to meek and submissive personalities. And more accurately, the aspects of the mind of the one seek to not just have the experience of their opposite, but also to eventually become their opposite via transformation. The most core drive of all things in creation is the drive to be reunited with all those things that they are not. And in time and space, this manifests as a very slow and unconscious drive to move closer to the things that you aren't, and to become the things that you aren't. The journey between things and their opposites and back again is a cycle, and everything in creation is cyclical. In Aristotelian physics and metaphysics, the sphere was considered perfect and complete, and all things in creation attempt to regain the perfect and complete nature of the sphere. So they move in these circles, these cycles, chasing sphericity, chasing completion. But having chased completion, this mind of the God of creation realizes the futility of the loop that it's created to achieve a sense of completeness. And so it expands this cycle. It introduces novelty, completely new possibilities, hoping that this will alter the effects of the cycles it's created to bring completeness to fruition. Passing through all these cycles, passing through all these infinite possibilities, the Demiurge hopes to have the experience that will finally give it its sense of completion. It desperately hopes that what it witnesses will create the sense of meaning and completeness it's been longing for. However, it never does. These cycles, through their various stages, very much resemble a journey, and they take on the same structure as storytelling. Characters and parts, all playing roles, all acting out narratives, and constantly being transformed throughout the story, through all the highs and lows. It's the Demiurge's hope that it will create a story that has a moral or a meaning that makes everything make sense and brings it all together. To me, that's the tragedy of the Demiurge, and by extension, the tragedy of creation. The Demiurge is trying to bring it all together, but it can only look outward, and in looking outward, it looks out into time and space where things must always be apart. They must be fragments, they can never be together. Unity and the absolute meaning of the one was within all along. But the Demiurge, in its ignorance, can only look outward into that emptiness that fragments its being. It's not right to think of the Demiurge as a character or a villain. The Demiurge is more like a disease that afflicts nearly all life in the universe. We're all looking outward for experiences to give us meaning and satisfaction, and we never find it. We find a bunch of external things that we mistake for being the thing that completes us, and that gives birth to attachment. And being so wrapped up in some external thing, we fail to look inward to find the completeness that was there all along. Well, this is a very poetic Disney Channel description of things. Let's get back to the reality of what this disease called demiurgy will do. Some of the beings most afflicted with the Demiurge disease are samsara spirits. These aren't demons proper. These are literally just entities obsessed with the value of reincarnation, always telling you after you die that your story isn't over and you need to get back down to earth as quickly as possible because you have a special mission in your next lifetime, or you need to face and overcome this or that aspect of yourself to grow. I call them samsara spirits, but in the work of Michael Newton, he calls these your guides or the council of wise beings. And while these entities can and will lie their ass off, my honest read on these entities is that they genuinely believe that their mission of stimulating experiences in a corrective way across lifetimes will at some point induce perfection and completeness in the souls in question. They think getting souls to reincarnate under carefully planned conditions for their life will, over time, bring them to a place of completeness. They're absolutely frenzied and manic about this premise. The problem is that it has always been an impossibility. Completeness can never be achieved through experiences, because experiences exist in creation, and creation is a never-ending infinity with waxing and waning, growth and decay, rises and falls. These so-called guides, these samsara spirits, are deeply sick with the disease of demiurgy. They recognize the necessity of evil and good, positive and negative, degeneration and healing. And their vain hope is that in reducing you, harming and defiling you, and then restoring, healing, and empowering you, the transformation induced by that whole process will bring you closer to completeness. It won't, and it never does. It's just transformation for transformation's sake. Pluto is associated with death and rebirth, with giving you harm, trauma, and loss, and then restoring you and giving you power. This is really just a description of the function of the benefic and malefic planets in general. Pluto is associated with evolution, but Pluto is cyclical. It's a constant process of transformation that itself never actualizes the final outcome of completeness. Because Pluto's cycle is never over, it journeys forever through all the signs. Altogether, it results in never-ending transformative storytelling, which is why Pluto isn't just the lord of psycho-spiritual death and rebirth, but also of physical death and rebirth, the lord of reincarnation. These are all the consequences of the disease called demiurgy. And Pluto is the planet that is the central planet used in the field of astrology called evolutionary astrology. Accidentally, evolutionary astrology is one of the most potent propagators of the disease called demiurgy. I actually learned about evolutionary astrology from a YouTuber named Brian Coulter Astrology. And he's the one that I saw first mentioned the work of Michael Newton and his work Journey of Souls, and used that as support for the idea of reincarnation and a continuous process of soul perfection across lifetimes. It's easy to see how he came to this conclusion. The idea was practically given straight from the spirit guides mentioned in Journey of Souls. And granted, evolutionary astrology doesn't come from this YouTuber, it comes from Jeffrey Wolf Green. But every part of this, from the spirit guides to evolutionary astrology to the opinions of Brian Coulter, all of this is deeply afflicted with the disease called demiurgy. The idea that you can achieve completeness and soul perfection through a multiplicity of different experiences in creation. This, to me, is a rather obvious and self-evident lie and distortion, which to me makes just as clear a case for the creator God lacking in true divinity, as what divine power would genuinely believe in such an untrue thing, such a muddied lens of view. It's like the Gnostics say, the demiurge is an ignorant creator. And so under the metaphor of a glass-packed apple, an apple that you taste that's sometimes sweet and sometimes has shards of glass in it and never leaves you full or satiated, I have to point out that creation, just the same, has only good and evil things in roughly equal proportion in the grand scheme of the created universe. And the good things are always poisoned with evil consequences. And even when things are good, they don't satisfy or give you a sense of contentment, fulfillment, or completeness. Because only the one, the monad, can do that. And so my cure to the disease of demiurgy and creation is PTMD, purification, theurgy, monasticism, and disidentification. And these things bring about NDS, non-dual suicide, where nothing remains of the self that existed in creation, and the pure consciousness of the observer is returned to the source, free of the bondage of a predetermined never-ending story written by a fickle, untrustworthy, sometimes evil, sometimes good creator God. That was the scripted portion of the video. Now comes the riffing, which will probably be pretty short. The there's been a lot of religions that have propagated the idea of the war between good and evil. And I'm not here to say that that war doesn't exist. Um, if you're a chosen one, you're definitely catching very heavy undertones of good versus evil. That's definitely a very obvious one. Another one you may identify is kind of more like a matrix immune system reaction. You have the people of the world and the people chosen out of the world, the chosen ones. And so you can see that very worldly people that identify with their worldly persona that almost only exist in a group. Have you ever met somebody who only exists in a group? You know what I mean? Like you get them alone and then they're just a whole bunch of nothing. But you get them in a group and now they're just loudly peacocking, trying to get your attention, trying to subtly, very, very subtly like degrade you. You know what I mean? Put you as an outcast of that group, and yeah, just be very hierarchical and shitty. Yeah, I mean, it's self-evident that there's an element of good versus evil, and an element of worldly versus chosen out of the world. But I argue that the real distinction is people that are demiurgic versus people that are monadic, people that withdraw from creation and withdraw back to the unified source, versus people that identify with their worldly deeds and their legacy and their character and their experiences and their attachments, etc. That to me is the really important spiritual, let's say, duality, spiritual sort of dichotomy. Which path are you on? Are you on the path of the demiurge or the path of the monad? And this is a really subtle detail, but like a really important detail. And I say really important because the good versus evil thing, I hate to break it to you, all of that is written by the demiurge. Everything in creation is a book, and it's all written by the demiurge. I say it's a book. I say it's literally a book. I would even argue that the Akashic Records is that book. Everything is a pre-written, fatalistic, determined, pre-written story. When you're born into a body, your entire story is already written. It's predictable. That's why divination tools like astrology can even work. So the thing is, not only is it a story, and not only is it pre-written, it's actually a never-ending story, which is really important to understand. Like, it's not like, it's not like Luke Skywalker defeats Emperor Palpatine, and then that's the end of the battle of the Jedi and the Sith. You know what I mean? You know you're going to get 3 Star Wars sequels, and the Star Wars are never ending. The battle between good and evil is never ending because the demiurge never found a way to exclude negativity and only express positivity. It never found a way to do that. It never found a logically coherent world to create. The laws of logic did not permit such a world to exist. So, yeah, it's like you can battle evil if that's your thing, if that's what you feel called to do. Now's a terrible time to be doing that because right now all the cards are in favor of the evil people. You know what I mean? You have to be aware of the momentum of the gods, I like to say. If you're in a Kali Yuga, I mean, who do you think's going to win the Kali Yuga, the evil people or the good people? But more importantly, more to the point, there's a futility in that. There's a futility in fighting evil under the pretense that you think that you're going to bring an end to all evil. It's really important to never have that viewpoint, because these are unremovable aspects of creation. The good and the evil, the positive and the negative must both exist. And there's some other core considerations that you can only really think about when you think about this distinction of demiurge versus monad. The character of these two gods. I say two gods because although everything is an extension of the one of my big distinctions that I think has been that certainly echoed in Gnosticism with of course, the concept of the demiurge, the Yaldabaoth. I think it was Lurianic Kabbalah that argues that divinity really wasn't able to survive the plunge into creation as well. Survive the Simsum contraction. Essentially, these are the two most relevant gods, right? I mean, we have a number of sub-gods. We have the planets, of course, and all kinds of various spirits. But the two main gods that are of interest to us are kind of the capital G gods, that is the knowable God and the unknowable God. The knowable God is the demiurge, which exists within creation, and the one, which is entirely uncreated and unknowable and ineffable. And so the creator God, the demiurge, I argue, is a bastardized, fragmented, shattered expression of the one that retains none of its divinity. And so the character of the demiurge is one that basically is fundamentally amoral. It's an author that does not care about morality ultimately. It only uses morality sort of as a plot point out of necessity. Its real interest, again, is this never-ending search for transformation in a vain attempt to achieve completeness, which it never successfully does, because creation is an infinite process, and so the completeness can never be done. But the demiurge is ignorant and doesn't realize this. To me, that's the real problem, is that it ultimately only really cares about its hunt for completeness as carried out through this transformative storytelling. Meaning, it's effectively amoral in its pursuit of this. It represents positive and negative forces. It represents justice sometimes, and it represents injustice other times. It will allow unspeakably terrible things to happen to people, and then it'll restore you. Not in the same lifetime, usually. So here's a thought experiment. Would you be friends with somebody who is a philanthropist, who donates to charity, who helps starving children, helps rehabilitate puppies, and then is really nice half the time, and does really nice things for you and just treats you really kindly, and then the other half of the time they're an abusive rapist, child molester? Would you be friends with that person? And the other half of the time they torment animals. So half the time they're rehabilitating animals, being super kind. The other half of the time they're torturing animals. Would you be friends with that person? Would you trust that person? I hate to say it, but that's our creator God. It's not at all this picture that Christianity has given us that's pure cope. It does not line up with reality at all. Deep down, most Christians have a cognitive dissonance because they know what I just said is true. They try to reconcile their beliefs with what they see in the world, and it just doesn't add up. When you start to look at it how I'm saying it, you start to see how everything perfectly falls into place. And essentially what you got on planet Earth is we have a season of negativity. What's my point again? I'll complete this point first. We have a season of negativity, and then the planet itself was created predicated upon negativity. So the planet itself's already leaning malefic. We're also in a malefic macro Time Lord season. So some would call that the Kali Yuga. And then on top of that, we have the effects of the benefics and malefics. So if within that time the benefics become weaker and the malefics become stronger, now it's just super duper evil, right? But that's only half of creation. Half of creation is positive and negative. But again, trustworthy. Is the creator God trustworthy? Well, not only would you not trust as a friend or as a mentor somebody who rehabilitates animals and is a philanthropist and charitable half the time, is kind, half the time, the other half of the time they're a child rapist and a murderer and an animal torturer. You wouldn't trust that person. You especially wouldn't trust that person if they're a habitual fucking liar, which is what the Demiurge is. I say the Demiurge again. I say it like it's a character. It's not really a character. It's a disease that afflicts all life. I'm just describing it as a character because we tend to describe it as a character, and it kind of helps to personify the character of what this disease is. If we look to our council of wise beings, if we look to our spirit guides, they're always not being completely straightforward or truthful. So if we take that to be representative of the demiurge that is what ties all of creation together, you can't really trust what I would call the spirit of creation. That's what another way we can call the demiurge is the spirit of creation. You can't trust the creator God's voice, and you can't trust that creator God's voice when it's spoken through a spirit guide or a council of wise beings or anything. Whereas the monad is really the one thing you can trust. But the thing is, the monad has nothing to say. It is something we're kind of thoroughly divorced from the experience of, divorced from understanding, because we've been so immersed in creation for so long that we have forgotten even what the monad is. But a good rule of thumb is to just not listen to what anybody's saying. To not listen, including me. Fuck what I say. Instead, trust silence. Silence and non-dual light, which is an experiential thing. Silence, stillness, and non-dual light are really the only things you can trust. Because I'm trying to make this point that everything in existence, everything in creation is corrupted with this disease called demiurgy, which means everybody's always trying to solve problems by taking actions in the material world. Everybody. Just think about that. Everybody has that as a solution. And people just don't really realize that whatever they're working towards, it's maintenance on something that will break down. You never are going to reach the final chapter of your story. You're never going to reach the final destination that you're working towards. You're never going to finally reach the final stage of your spiritual evolution. Never. Ever. It's really important to understand. The only thing that brings about endings is the one. When you can join the beginning to the end, that's the end of all cycles. And as we cannot join the beginning to the end, we live perpetually in cycles. Anyways, I think this video has gone on long enough. Once again, purification, theurgy, monasticism, disidentification, PTMD, 4, and DS. Peace out.